welcome to the show, Maria.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the program. I was just commenting on how you have a much more visually compelling background than I do. So I'm glad you brought some color to the show today. But I'm really looking forward to today's conversation because I've read a whole bunch on psychology and human behavior and things like that. And oftentimes these books, while they're compelling and whatnot, they're based on, say, academics doing research, dissecting studies and whatnot, whereas your new book, The Biggest Bluff, is based on your own lived experience. But before we even get into the book, I mean, from what I understand, it was inspired by a bad run of luck in your own life. What can you tell me about that?
Sure. So I had this period of months where everything seemed to go wrong. So I had a bad health scare where no one really knew what was wrong, but I developed an autoimmune condition where I became allergic to everything. So I basically my body would erupt in hives when anything touched it. So I almost couldn't wear clothes. So I couldn't go outside. There were these huge patches of time where just everything was covered in hives. My hormones were all over the place. I was put on all these steroids, and no one could figure it out. I went to all of these experts, and they're like idiopathic. We don't know. And around the same time, my grandmother died, and it was just a freak accident. She was totally healthy. She slipped in the night and hit her head, and no one saw it coming. She was living by herself, totally independent. My mom lost her job. My husband lost his job. Just everything happening, like one thing after another. And it made me really appreciate just how powerful luck is and how big a role it plays in our lives. And I decided that I wanted to explore that I wanted to write a book about luck and the nature of luck and how we can learn to tell the things that we control from those we can't. And eventually, after a lot of reading, a lot of research, I came across poker when I was looking at game theory, because it turns out that John von Neumann, who's the father of game theory, was a poker player, and that game theory came out of poker. And so that's how I initially came to be interested in poker, and decided that, you know what, I've never played before. Why don't I learn this game? Why don't I get someone to teach me and embark on an adventure and see what happens?
Yeah, I understand. I've got a copy of Theory of Games and Economic Behavior here from John von Neumann. And I understand, before we get further into your story, that von Neumann wasn't really a big proponent of using games to model human behavior or life, except for poker. Why poker?
Yes.
Why is poker different?
So von Neumann was bored by most games. He thought that chess was good for some stuff, but pretty bad for modeling any sort of real decision-making, because it's a game of perfect information. You see the entire board, you see all the pieces, there's always a right move. So theoretically, you give me enough computing power, I solve for you, and I tell you what you're supposed to do. And then there's the other extreme. There are things like roulette, which are also incredibly boring to him, because that's just pure chance. There's nothing you can do. There's no skill in it at all. It's just gambling.
Yeah.
Poker is in the middle. It's a game of incomplete information. So there's what I know, there's what you know, there's what we know in common, and I have to make the best decision I possibly can based on what I know right now, and knowing that I don't know everything, knowing that it's incomplete, that I'm making inferences, that I have to act based on incomplete information. He has this wonderful quote that real life consists of bluffing, of little tactics of deception, of figuring out what does this man think I mean to do. And that's what games are about in my theory. Now, I love that quote. It just tells you so much about the heart of game theory, about the heart of poker, that it is, it's about strategy, it's about nuance, it's about not just math, it's about people. And so von Neumann was fascinated by this game in particular because of that element, because of that incomplete information element. He said, when we're looking at life decisions, that's what we're looking at. We're looking at incomplete information. You never know everything in life. You never know all the variables. There's never a 100%. It just doesn't exist. In life, every single decision is filled with uncertainty, and you need to do it anyway, and you need to try to do it to the best of your abilities.
I think, was it Nassim Taleb who said something along the lines of randomness is just incomplete information? I mean, what do you think about that quote?
I mean, that's part of it. I don't think randomness is fully. I mean, obviously, yes, it's a sort of reductionist statement. Of course, randomness is incomplete information because it's stuff we don't know. It just happens. It's variance. But it's funny. Taleb actually inspired the last chapter of my book, which is called The Ludecke Fallacy, because he distrusts kind of the entire premise, which is that poker can be a model for life. He doesn't think that games can be modeled. That life can be modeled through games. So I actually address him head on at the end of my book about why, yes, he's absolutely right, but why that makes it such a powerful teaching tool and learning environment.
Yeah.
It's cleaner.
Well, definitely. And we'll get into what you actually learned through this experience and this ongoing experience, because I know you're still planning to carry on your poker career. But something that I see all the time I've interviewed hundreds of people across myriad domains. And what I often see is, particularly with entrepreneurs, is when they become successful, they look back and they tend to attribute success to the things they'd rather remember than the things they'd rather forget. So it's like drawing that straight line, that narrative fallacy, and perhaps discounting the role of chance.
Hindsight bias.
Work. Exactly. And I know this is something that you perhaps gained a little bit more clarity on through your experience. But before we get to that, I mean, you reached out to, was it Eric Seidel, one of the
Seidel,
Seidel, one of the Poker Hall of Fame inductees. I mean, he's won the World Series of poker a number of times. And when you reached out to him, like, had you played poker in your life before?
Nope, never.
No.
Zero. I did not know how many cards were in a deck.
Yeah, fantastic. So pretty much had the same poker knowledge that I have nowadays. I mean, I know the river, the turn, and the flop. That's about it. And
I didn't know that.
Shuffling cards. Well, there you go. I knew a little bit more. What's your card shuffle game like? Because mine's terrible. Everyone always laughs at me when I'm at the poker table trying to shuffle.
Oh, it's fine now.
It's fine?
Yeah. You kind of have to develop those skills. Yes. So I can shuffle. I can shuffle the deck for you.
Fantastic.
It's not as good as people who are actually good at shuffling, who just do it perfectly. Mine's not perfect, but it will suffice.
Yes, fair enough. Good enough. Near enough is good enough. So when you reached out to him, I guess there's a lesson in that, because you did so based on your journalistic credentials. I mean, you're a writer for The New Yorker. You'd published two New York Times bestselling books before The Biggest Bluff. And you essentially used that to try and strong arm him is probably the wrong word, but try and get him to mentor you, right?
Yes, I wouldn't say strong arm, although I was as convincing as I could possibly be. But yes, that was my pitch to him. I said, look, this is my background. You know, it's not like I'm a poker player asking you to help me get better. I am a journalist. I'm working on this new project. I'm also a psychologist. I have a PhD in psychology. I studied risky decision making. You know, this is my background, and I'd love to learn about the game. And I'd love to share what I've learned with the world. And I think that intrigued him.
Yeah. And so with respect to that conversation, I understand he said you had the right background. So was he essentially saying because you had studied human behavior that made you... He said he couldn't guarantee it, obviously, because no one knows if you're going to be good at something, right? I could have had the background I had, and it ended up that I was just
rubbish at poker. That could have absolutely happened. But he said that, at least it seems like my mind works in the right ways. I'm someone who studied psychology, who understands a lot about the pitfalls of human decision-making, about self-control, emotional regulation, all of those elements. My advisor was Walter Mischel, who's famous for the marshmallow studies of self-control. Can you wait for your second marshmallow or do you eat it right away? So I'd studied a lot of these techniques. And so I think Eric thought that would be a good background. I speak a number of languages, and he thought that language learning was actually also incredibly helpful because poker was almost like a new language. And so I think that he thought that there was a good chance that I'd be well suited for it. But, you never know. You never know. You never know how someone's going to act at the actual poker table.
Yeah.
Would I be able to apply it?
Yeah. Would you be able to apply that and think in real time? It's one thing to sit down and dissect the psychology of human behavior and everything else and write an article about it. But when you're at the poker table, high stakes, pressure, everything else, only so much time to make a decision. It's a totally different ballgame.
Exactly.
But I like that you said language is important to learn because then you can predispose yourself to learning different types of languages, such as poker, because I'm helping my 13-year-old niece at the moment with a little business project. And last night she's like, hey, uncle, what do you think about humanities? I think it's a waste of time. What about language? Like, I'm not going to go to any of these countries. Like, why should I learn these languages? So maybe I should hook her up with you and you can be like, hey, you learn a language, you can learn poker, you can make all this money on the poker table, you can be World Series and poker champion, all that stuff. I think she needs someone to really hone that message home. But speaking of family, I understand when you revealed to Baba Anya, your grandmother, that you were going to go down this line of poker. I mean, you've got your PhD from the University of Columbia, you're writing for the New Yorker, you're a New York Times bestselling author, and then you tell Baba Anya that you want to play poker. How did that conversation go down?
Not well. She was, to call her not thrilled would be an understatement. She was just, I think I broke her heart. I think she just looked at me with just such deep despair. Like, I'm about to throw my entire life away. I can't believe that you're doing this. She just thought that I was about to just go into this den of iniquity, that I was selling my soul to the devil. It was just this devastation. Like, what are you doing? What are you doing with your life? Can't you, be a professor? Mm-hmm. That's what you really should be doing. Or at least just stay writing and don't, but poker, man, she read me the Riot Act, told me about all these gamblers who'd come to ruin in the past. And I tried to explain to her that poker's not gambling, that it's a skill game, that I'm not becoming a gambler. I'm not hitting the craps tables. That's not what I'm doing. But she was not impressed. No, and she remained not impressed. Every time I saw her, she would ask me if I was done yet with poker.
Does she still ask you now after the success you've had in the
She's
space,
been asking me for a long time. The last time I saw her was in February for her 95th birthday. This was right before the COVID lockdown, so we actually got it in right under the wire. And for the first time, I actually think she made peace with it a little bit, because my book was going to be coming out. I was still playing. She realized that I'm going to keep playing even when my book comes out. And I think that she kind of made her peace with it and said, well, it seems like it's opened a lot of doors for you. Yeah. And I said, yes, it really has.
Yeah, I think that's something maybe a lot of entrepreneurs can relate to. You go to uni, you might get an MBA, you'll go and work for a big corporate and start climbing the ladder and then say, this isn't really for me. I'm going to throw it all away. And your parents think, what the hell are you doing? You're crazy. You're going to work for like $400 a week and live off ramen noodles. But once that money starts coming in, if you get to that stage, then the pessimism, the cynicism kind of starts to fade away. So you need to get those runs on the board. But I know Baba Anya wanted you to play chess, and that's where you say that chess is a game of perfect information, but life, like you said earlier, is a game of uncertainty, which lends itself perfectly to poker. So you met Eric. You spent about a year, I understand, working with him.
Well, that was the original plan. It ended up being much longer, but the original plan was a year.
The original plan was a year. So tell me about, I suppose, that trial by fire. Like, what did your first foray into poker look like? Was it like a smoky back alley bar somewhere? How did it go down?
No, my first live game was a charity tournament. These are people who paid thousands of dollars to be there. Everyone was, well, actually it was a funny mix of people. Some were dressed to the nines, like, evening wear, black tie. And then there were people in t-shirts. Because there wasn't actually a dress code and you could wear whatever you wanted. So you could tell right away who, how people were approaching it. And it was a very funny mix. And I was just terrified. I was so nervous. I didn't know that I was going to be playing. Eric tricked me because I knew he was playing. He was one of the featured players at this charity event. And I thought I was just going to watch him and kind of learn from him as he played, that it was going to be my chance to watch him play live. And then it ends up that he'd actually arranged for me to have a seat as well. And I was not impressed. And I said, why couldn't you have told me, this is terrible. Now I want to leave. And he said, well, you didn't have a chance to get nervous. I'm like, but now I'm terrified. Now I'm dying. So it was really nerve-wracking. I'd been playing online a little bit, but this just caught me completely off guard. And it was just trying to take in all of this information, try to make all of this work and not make a stupid mistake. I was so afraid of looking stupid. It was a lot. It was a lot to take in. I almost folded pocket aces, which is the best hand you can have, before the flop because I was just so nervous. So it was a steep learning curve.
Yeah. And how did that first sort of event go down in terms of your success or lack thereof at the first game?
I lasted a few hours, which is a few hours more than I should have lasted. I got very lucky. But then I busted. I didn't make it even close to the final table. But Eric came in second.
Yeah, well, Eric, I suppose, was coming to the table with a lot more experience than you are. But it didn't take you long to go from busting out and coming away with nothing to amassing what I understand you've won over $200,000 at the table since
over
then.
300,000.
Over 300,000. Wow, so you're just like almost exponentially boosting your prize money here. You've competed at a number of different high-profile events, including the World Series of Poker. You won the 2018 PCA National Championship, which was for $84,000. What happened between that first game and the $300,000+ in prize money that you just kindly reminded me of?
So at the beginning, so before that first tournament, I'd been studying a lot and playing online. And then after that, I made my first trip to Vegas. So I played my first real poker tournament, my first live poker tournament that wasn't a charity event in January of 2017. And I spent a lot of time in Vegas. So I spent almost 2 months there at the beginning. Just playing every day, studying, reviewing hands, busting. And then I started improving. So kind of the work was paying off and I started getting a feel for it. I started becoming more confident. And suddenly I won my first tournament. And it's not on, there's this thing called the Hendon Mob, which tracks tournament results for tournament players. And because it was such a small tournament, it's not on there. But it was almost $1,000. It was over $900. So it was a huge amount of money for me and a huge confidence booster. So I started winning the small ones. Then Eric let me move up in stakes. So I started playing, instead of $35 tournaments, $100 tournaments. Started doing well in those eventually, making final tables, coming in second a few times, and then went to bigger events and just kept working and plugging my leaks. So figuring out where I was going wrong, what I was doing wrong, what I needed to work on. I ended up getting more coaches. So on the strategy side, I worked not just with Eric, but with another brilliant player, Phil Galfond, and a bunch of other people helped me out along the way. Ike Haxton, Jason Kuhn, just all of these wonderful minds. And so I was doing that. Then I got a mental coach, Jared Tendler, who helped me with kind of the mental elements of the game. So I was really just putting everything into it and really trying my best. And then I started really seeing results. So I made my first international final table in Dublin. I came in second in an event, which was great. But I kept coming in second and I was getting frustrated. So then I spent the last 2 months of 2017 working exclusively on heads up poker, which means one-on-one poker. So I took a class from this place called Upswing. There's a poker player named Doug Polk, and he just has a class that you can pay for on heads up poker. I watched heads up experts, and I just studied only that. And that really, I think, helped me a lot with shorthanded play. So playing when there are not as many players. And it just helped me think differently and become a more experienced player in a lot of ways. So when we got to January 2018, which was exactly a year since I played my first real tournament in Vegas, that's what I had been doing. And so that was the PCA. And so almost a year to the day from my first ever walking into a casino, I ended up not only final tabling this major international event, but winning. And I think that the heads up practice that I had really helped me. And so that I think changed everything, because winning is very different from coming in second. The media doesn't care about second place. First place is what matters. And that enabled me to get a sponsorship. I became a PokerStars Team Pro. So all of a sudden, I was able to travel around the world and play in all of these tournaments. I had a much bigger budget. It enabled me to keep going. And I wanted to sign that contract because I wanted to keep going. I wanted to prove to myself that I could do it, that this wasn't just a one-off thing, that I didn't just completely luck out to win this tournament. And so I ended up just playing full time for 2018. And I think when I calculated, I spent 8 months out of the year traveling. So I was in New York a total of 4 months in 2018, which is crazy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you mentioned the media doesn't care about second place, and you've graced a few magazine covers, Bluff magazine, Card Player magazine. Now, I mean, did you ever think that as a writer that you would be gracing magazines?
No, I did not. And if you had told me, guess you're going to be on a magazine cover, what will it be? I mean, maybe like a Writer's Digest type of thing. I never would have in a million years guessed that it would be a poker magazine.
Yeah. I mean, I want to talk a little bit more about the learning, but how did you deal with that sort of, the spotlight suddenly being shone on you? Obviously, you've had some success with the writing. And I mean, as a writer, you already have the spotlight on you, but it's a different kind of a spotlight. It's, you've got a column in the New York Times. You might find, say, you post a YouTube video and it'll get 100,000 views or something like that, but it's quite different when you're on magazine covers. How did you find that transition? And how did you deal with that new pressure that was on you, I suppose?
I tried my best to not think about it and to just be a good ambassador for the game. So I said, you know what, I need to just keep working hard and try to be as good a role model as I can, because now in this more public figure, there's a bit more responsibility on me to make sure that I'm really choosing carefully how the game is portrayed. I'm also female. There aren't many women in the game. The game is 3% female, 97% male. I mean, the skew is insane. And so I really was conscious of that. And so I wanted to just do my best to have good energy to make the experience as pleasant as possible for people, and to work hard to show that I was really committed to this. And so I just tried to focus on what I could focus on. I mean, it's a little hard because I don't love being in the spotlight. However, I knew that I was also writing a book that was a first-person memoir. So I damn well better get used to having it be, being a character. I've never done that before. I'm not a personal essayist. I don't write first-person essays. A lot of people, it's funny, a lot of people didn't realize I was married. And I've been married for over 10 years. I just don't share my personal life online at all. I'm very public, but also very private. And so it was a very funny dance to try to execute correctly.
Sounds like a very delicate dance. And of course, you're not only trying to respect the game, but you're also an ambassador for women in the game, being one of only, 3% that make up the entire population on the competitive circuit. So you've obviously got a certain responsibility there as well. And I think from what I can see, I think you danced that delicate dance well. So it sounded like you were quite intentional though, when going back to the learning. I mean, you had all these coaches, you were very intentional and deliberate about identifying what you could improve. You then decided to focus on the heads-up poker to hone that part of your game, which you could then translate back into the group poker, for lack of a better word in my vocabulary.
Full ring.
Full ring. There you go. So I guess this is something where maybe this is transferable to other domains, where sometimes you have people who are particularly, say, invested in something and they'll just work day after day, year after year, but perhaps not be as intentional about identifying what are the gaps in their game that they can improve, what kind of mentors do they need to seek out. And if they did those things, maybe after a year or two, the compound effect of that would be massive. I mean, what's your take on that? The fact that obviously it goes without saying you sought out mentors, you learned and then you improved, but the fact that you actually did that gave you this advantage that perhaps people who have been playing for 5, 10, 15 years and not to talk down what they have achieved or their efforts, perhaps wouldn't achieve because they're not putting in the same kind of effort into their intentional, deliberate learning.
Well, I think that one of the skills that I brought to poker is that I am a good learner. I know how to learn. That's something I've always been good at. I have, my old advisor, Walter Michel, had a wonderful term. It's a Yiddish word, and I don't actually remember the Yiddish word, but the rough translation is butt in chairness. So the quality of being able to keep your butt in the chair and to actually put in the work and put in the hours. And I have that. And I also, because I've done a lot of different things, I also knew the importance of it being effective. So, the hours don't matter if you're not using them correctly. It's not just time. It's time that is meaningful. And so I just did my best. I didn't know anything about poker. I didn't know kind of what the component parts were. I didn't know what I'd need to master. I didn't know what I didn't know. And so I just kind of played it one step at a time. And as I figured out, okay, I'm bad at this, I need help with this, I need that, then I just kind of worked with that and would focus on things where I seemed to need help. And something that I've always been good at is asking for help. I think as a journalist, I've always had to do it. I write about things I don't understand all the time. I'm always talking to people who are much smarter than I am, who are much more experienced than I am, who've accomplished a lot more than I ever will. And I just have to, I have to ask them. And I've learned that it's okay to just be stupid and to say, look, I don't understand. I don't know this. And sometimes, I'll talk to scientists when I'm writing about something complex, and they'll explain it and they'll say, does that make sense? And I've learned that it's okay to say no. I still don't get it. Help me. And there was one piece that I remember writing, which was really, it's funny, I don't really have a science background, just psychology. Like, that's what I know, but I've never taken after high school, I didn't take any math or science classes. Psychology is it. And so I was doing this piece that was much more basic biology, and I don't remember anything. And it was really hard for me. And so I just spent hours with this researcher going back and forth and like just asking to clarify and clarify and clarify. And I finally got it. And I wrote the piece, and I got the best note from her. She said, "This is the single clearest explanation of my work that I've ever read." And that was just so gratifying because I'm not going to write it until I actually understand. I'm not just going to put the words out there. But because I'm willing to admit that, I'm willing to admit complete ignorance, I think it makes me very receptive to feedback, to criticism, to ways that I can improve. And so to me, it's not an ego thing. I don't think it makes me look weak to say, okay, I need help with this, I need help with that, because I want the end result. I want to be the best player I possibly can, whether it's a player at poker or anything else. And in order to do that, you need to constantly reevaluate, analyze yourself, and look at where you can improve, because you can always improve in everything. People ask me, your second book must have been much easier to write than your first, and your third must have been even easier. No, absolutely not. They're all damn difficult because they're all different, and my bar is different, and what I'm trying to accomplish is different. And each time I sit in front of a blank page and I think, oh my God, I'm never going to be able to do this. This book is never going to get written. I should just return my advance and admit that I'm a fraud every single time. And it doesn't get easier. It gets harder because the bar gets higher, and the expectations get higher. My expectations for myself. I want to be able to do more, because if I write the same book I've already written, what have I really done?
No, absolutely true. And we only have so much time on this earth, so you want to put good work out there rather than just, half-baked stuff. But when it comes to, saying, I don't know, I mean, that's just so powerful. And it actually echoes what another poker player, Annie Duke, who I had on the show, said about a year and a half ago. She said, I don't know are 3 of the most powerful words you can say, because it opens you up to learning. Otherwise, if you just have your ego up here and your wall up and you don't want to appear stupid and you self-censor, well, you lose in that exchange. You don't learn anymore. You end up standing still, or maybe even regressing, because other people are getting the knowledge and you're just standing still. So I don't know. It's so powerful. And also another thing you touched on, which I think we should just double click on, is that effective learning. Like you can sit down and kind of, if you're trying to learn the guitar, you might have your guitar out, and while Netflix is up and you're watching Tiger King or whatever is popular right now, and you're just doodling, like, sure, you're practicing, quote unquote, but you're not really, it's not deliberate practice. It's not like you're in the flow state and you're learning a new song and you're learning these new techniques. And like when I was researching for my previous book, Time Rich, there was a study about violinists at the Conservatory of Music in Berlin, where they would put in, say, 4 hours a day of deliberate practice. And that would be broken up into, say, 45-minute chunks. And then beyond that, like their ability to focus and put in deliberate practice and get into flow really faded away. So it sounded like with you, when you were learning these different techniques and mastering your mindset and everything else, you were really intentional about getting into that place of deliberate practice rather than just, let's just go down to the local, casino or whatever and just spend a few hours there and that'll be my practice for the day.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, I think you need to be that way whenever you're trying to actually learn anything, because otherwise it's going in one ear and out the other. I wrote a piece once for the New Yorker a while back. I think it was for the New Yorker. Actually, no, this one was for the New York Times. It was before I was at the New Yorker, about handwriting and learning. And there'd been work done, and it showed that you absorb information better and you remember it much better and you perform better on subsequent exams if you take notes by hand as opposed to on the computer. And there's this, it makes so much sense because there's this motor link between your hand and your brain, and you have to process it. And also, you don't write as quickly as you type. And so you have to actually process the information before you even write it down. Your brain already has to figure out, okay, what's the main idea? What do I need to write down? You can't just verbatim be typing what the professor or whoever you're listening to is saying. You actually have to do some work before so that you are able to write down kind of the gist, the main takeaway, the main themes, the main whatever it is. And so people ended up doing much better when they took notes by hand. And that, to me, is just such a wonderful illustration of how you do need to be active and present and deliberate about what you're doing. Otherwise, you're not actually going to learn it. So a lot of people have asked me, what should I do to learn poker? I watch these videos and nothing ever sticks. I'm like, okay, well, how do you watch a video? For me, if a video is half an hour long, the minimum amount of time it's going to take me to watch is 2 hours. Because I stop, I rewind, I take notes, I make sure I understand it. If I don't understand it, I look up what I don't understand. I write down questions to ask later. You have to engage with it. For a lot of people, the way they watch videos or do anything is, they'll have the video, as you say, then they'll have something else. They'll have some poker tables open and be playing while they're watching and doing this and doing that, and then saying, oh, well, it didn't really, it didn't help. These aren't good videos. Well, I don't know. Maybe they're not good videos, but maybe they are. And maybe you just weren't letting them get through to you. One of the things, it's funny, my first book, Mastermind, was about Sherlock Holmes, but really it was about mindfulness and about the importance of presence and being in the moment and really paying attention and observing. And one of the things that I explore there is just how bad we are, that our brains can't multitask, that when we think we're multitasking, we're really task switching. And so we're not as effective at anything. We get much more tired because it's actually much more cognitively demanding to task switch. And we become much worse at paying attention. It actually is detrimental to all of these different things. And so we can't, there's no such thing as a good multitasker. It doesn't exist. You might be better at not filtering out distractions or something like that, but it's a different thing. And that muscle, that attention muscle gets tired. It stops working. Your attention span decreases. You can also build it back up by actually being more mindful about it. But I think that really, once I learned that, I think it really informed how I approached everything from that point forward. So I do yoga every morning. I meditate every day. Like, it actually really helps me just be present and really take things in and really process them. That's why, so many poker players, when they play online, they multi-table. They'll have like 8 tables open, 10 tables open, 20 tables open. I mean, some have had many more. There have been records set. You read about some of the records in my book. I don't actually remember them off the top of my head, but they're insane about number of hands played and all of that. And their goals are different. These are pros and they're just trying to maximize their hourly rate. So I get that. But to me, I can't do that. I think you need to focus. You need to pay attention. You need to really absorb and get as much as you can from everything. And people say, oh, well, I can't, it's just boring. It's so boring. I'm like, well, that's because you're not engaging. There's so much you could be doing. There's so much to pay attention to at any given moment. I don't think there's ever a reason to be bored.
Yeah, definitely. Especially if you pursue something that aligns with your natural inclinations and interests, and you're genuinely motivated to get better at that thing for whatever reason. But if you just pick something because everyone else is doing it, but it doesn't really align, well, of course you're going to get bored. I mean, you need to figure out what's good for you. It's like, a lion hunting a buffalo. I mean, that's what it's made to do. So it's super engaged in that activity. But definitely nowadays, I mean, task switching, some of the research I've come across, I think it was from Advanced Brain Monitoring, found that small task switches like picking up your phone to check a notification and then getting back to your work, like that can cost you up to 23 minutes to get back into flow. That's take you up to 23 minutes. That's providing you were even in the flow state to begin with, because nowadays you could be checking your phone every 5 minutes. Like you said, you've got
hold on a
several
sec.
tabs up.
I'm just kidding.
Exactly. It's the whole thing, right? So we're constantly interrupted, and we can never really get into that place of flow. And I think it's really requires us to be intentional that if we are learning something, to just do away with those distractions and get comfortable. Because if you get comfortable just focusing, because it can be an uncomfortable place for people if they're not used to doing it.
Absolutely.
Just with that, I mean, we talked about learning how to learn, learning effectively, doing away with distractions. I mean, are there any other sort of, say, high leverage or meta skills that you have learned either through poker or through your own work that you apply to life more broadly?
A lot. There are definitely a lot of higher level skills. I mean, the paying attention one is just crucial, and it underpins everything else. Another one is to approach things with the right attitude, which is one of genuine curiosity. I think you need to be motivated by intrinsic motivation rather than extrinsic rewards. I think it's so important to do things. You know, I can't stop thinking about your 13-year-old niece because it's such a common attitude, and it really upsets me because it's not just your niece; it's schools. They're setting this attitude. So in the U.S., there was a debate a few years ago because some schools were saying we're no longer going to teach fiction because fiction is useless. We're only going to teach nonfiction. And I just wanted to tear my hair out. I thought, are you kidding? You know, fiction is useless? Are you insane? Fiction teaches us how to be critical thinkers. Fiction teaches us, you know, how to be empathetic people. Fiction teaches us so much. Are you insane that it's useless? But this whole attitude that I only want to learn something, I only want to do it if I know, if it's pragmatic, if I know how it's going to be useful. It's such a bad way of going through life. You're going to not enjoy things. You're not going to learn them as well. You're not going to absorb them as well. And who are you to know what's going to be useful? Can you see the future? Seriously? So in my mind, the much more powerful guide is do what interests you. Follow your curiosity. Do things because you think it's interesting, because you're excited about learning it. And then it will be useful. You know, something that I learned from my parents, my mom would tell me this all the time when I said, you know, I wanted to be a writer. We don't have money as a family. It's not like they're like, oh yes, you know, here is a monthly stipend, go and be a writer. They were always incredibly supportive of me emotionally, but they couldn't support me financially. And don't underestimate the emotional support. I'm so insanely lucky to have the best parents in the world. But my mom would always say, you know, don't worry, you know, we don't care if you're a doctor or a lawyer. It probably helps that my sister's an MD, PhD, and a doctor. So and she's older, so she got that taken care of. But they said, you know, it doesn't matter. Do what makes you happy, because then you're going to be better at it. And then you're going to make more money at it because you're actually going to be good, because you're going to enjoy it. If you are good at what you do, you will be able to make a living no matter what. I mean, we're not talking about being a millionaire. I'm not a millionaire, you know, I'm a writer. but you know, you will be able to survive and to make a living. And I think that's so true, because I had no idea what was going to be useful when. I just did things because I wanted to, because I loved them, because, you know, I studied creative writing. I studied fiction and psychology. You know, that is not something that is necessarily a career maker. And then, you know, then I went and, you know, my career there's no forward moving trajectory. It just goes all over the place because I don't know what's going to happen. And so I take opportunities that seem interesting. I say yes when it seems interesting. I say no when I don't want to do it, even if it seems like a good career move. Because you know what? If I'm not happy, I'm going to be an awful employee. I know this. I don't survive in the corporate world. I tried. But it's one of these things where you just need to, I think, following your curiosity and doing things for the right reasons, being motivated by the right things is so important at learning and at becoming better. One of the reasons that Eric Seidel is still one of the best players in the world over 30 years after he started playing, there's no one else like that. It's because he loves the game. He's not doing it to make money. He's doing it because he's passionate about the game, because to him, it's about the process, about the decisions. He told me early on, the goal of poker is not to make money. The goal is to make good decisions. And that's so incredibly powerful. That's why he's still making money, because he's constantly growing and learning and evolving along with the game. Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, on so much you've said, especially on the intrinsic motivation piece. I myself spent about 10 years in the corporate world before I jumped out about 7 years ago to pursue entrepreneurship, and have never been happier. And it is about finding, I think Dan Pink wrote about it in Drive, where it was about mastery, autonomy, and purpose. Like having those three things in your life not only makes you more engaged with your work, but also that stuff sort of permeates into everything else you do. Like if you're unhappy at work, you're probably going to bring that unhappiness back home. And then you can infect your family or your friends or your housemates with that sort of attitude as well. And I think nowadays, I was looking at the numbers on employee engagement globally. It was a Gallup report, which found 85% of people are either actively disengaged or just not engaged at work, which is like 1 in 7 people are engaged and enjoying work, and everyone else is kind of like just turning up, making sure they're physically present, at least on Zoom or in the office, depending on what sort of remote working policy they have nowadays, and going home to watch TV. And like, that's just, to me, it's really tragic to see that. And I also think it's something that perhaps, I'm not going to call out schools, but I remember being 17, sitting in a career counselor's office and being asked, what do you want to do with your life, kiddo? And it's like, I don't know, I guess accounting, because my parents suggested it, and it's going to be a safe and secure role. And then I went off and worked for EY and KPMG and all that for like 8-9 years before I realized I hated it. So, but at the same time, you mentioned fiction, and, fiction, what I've learned from reading, say, Homer or Paulo Coelho or Tolstoy, or books on philosophy, is that sometimes you need to go through certain amounts of difficulty before you start asking questions. Maybe like as a 17-year-old, I just didn't have that requisite life experience. But by 27, 28, it's like, I hate this. I need to ask some big life questions and change the path.
So when I said before that I'm insanely lucky when it comes to my parents, I remember, so when I was 16, that was my senior year, I skipped a grade. So I'm actually younger than I should be given when I graduated. So I actually couldn't drink legally all through college. I didn't turn 21. Legally. Yeah. I didn't turn 21 until graduation. But so I was 16. It was my senior year. And I remember I had a guidance counselor, and was the beginning of the year, and she looked at my schedule and she said, this can't be your schedule. And I said, why not? She said, well, you don't have any science on here. She said, you're at the top of your class. You could get into all these wonderful schools. No one's going to take you with this schedule. Look at you. You have a creative writing elective, just independent study, French literature, independent study. Like, look at your entire schedule is independent studies. Like, you're not taking, like, where is the advanced placement, chemistry? Where is, the physics? Where are all of these things? I've still never taken a physics class. That was actually probably a mistake. I kind of wish I knew some physics, but I said, you know what? And I actually could stand up to her because I had my parents and they had my back, and they told me, you do what you want to do. You don't worry about that. You take the classes you want to take. It will all work out. If a college doesn't want you because of that, you don't want that college. And the fact that they just, they empowered me to actually tell my guidance counselor to fuck off and to say, I appreciate you, but no. And in a nice way, I didn't actually say fuck off. But I
said it in Russian.
I said it in Russian. Yes. Because, they taught me, I think, to kind of value the right things in a way. And I said, no, you know what? I appreciate your feedback, but no, I'm not changing my schedule. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to have all these independent studies. And this is how I want to spend my senior year. And obviously I ended up getting into college. I was incredibly nervous and gave myself a bit of a nervous breakdown because I thought I wasn't going to get into college because of a lot of people telling me I wasn't. But it was really, that being able to kind of stand up and say, you know what, no, I'm going to do this anyway was really powerful. And yet I was able to do it then because I was comfortable in high school. But then when I got to college, when I got to my senior year of college and I wanted to be a writer and all of my friends were going through corporate recruiting or going to law school or going to medical school, and people would be like, well, so what are you doing? I'm like, I don't know. I want to move to New York and see what happens. I caved in. I actually went on all the corporate recruiting interviews. I took an LSAT prep course because I was like, maybe I should go to law school. Luckily, I didn't end up taking the LSATs, but I spent, that was my own money. That was money I made working during the summers. That was not well spent money. And I just, I did those things because I panicked. And I thought, I need some job offers. And I did. I got some investment banking job offers and some consulting job offers. And thank God that, at the end of the day, I decided to become a bartender instead. But it was one of those moments where I could have applied to law school. I could have, and I wanted to because there was so much pressure and I caved. I thought, maybe I can't be a writer. And it was scary. I mean, it's always scary. At the end of the day, the right thing ended up happening, but I took a job in consulting, and I actually ended up having to quit my first day on the job when I realized what did I do. So I quit the summer I was hired. I moved to New York, went into the office and was like, no.
Wow.
But that happened. And it was, so those pressures are real.
Oh, yeah, definitely need good people around you, whether it is people at school, parents, peers, just people in your network who can kind of guide you in the right direction. And if you don't have that, well, it sounds like you at least had the conviction to know, day one at a management consulting firm after having gone through, jump through hoops and everything else to get there, to actually say, actually, you know what, this isn't for me. I'm going to go down a different path and become a bartender, whatever the case was. I think that's really good. It's actually refreshing to hear that, because for a lot of people, even if they are unhappy, I mean, day one, they're just going to feel so much pressure not to quit, to just stick it out for a year or two.
Yeah, that's another thing that I think I have to thank my parents for. They gave me the conviction that I could do it. They believed in me, and so I believed in me. In a way, I mean, I still don't really believe in me the way they do, but I, at least I thought, what's the worst? One of the things I always do, this is a mental habit I've always had, is I always play out the worst case scenario, or the worst case scenario in anything is always death. So not that worst case scenario, but what's the worst that can happen? And so that helps me deal with anything, because then if I figure out, okay, what's the worst thing that can happen and how am I going to react to it? And if I have a response plan, if I actually know what I'm going to do, then I can do it. Because then I already know that I'm prepared for the worst. I'm prepared for everything to go wrong. And that's just the way that I've always been. And so with this, when I was quitting this job, I thought, okay, what's the worst that can happen? I don't find another job. I'm unable to pay my rent. Okay, so what am I going to do? Okay, I'll get rid of this apartment that I've rented, which was a 90 square foot studio. It was a glorified walk-in closet. Yep. Like two people could barely fit in it, with a bed that was lofted under the ceiling, but at least I could afford it. And I said, okay, I'll leave this and I'll move back in with my parents, and figure it out. That's not so bad. I don't want to do that, but it's not so bad. Okay. All right. It's not like, and I didn't have many months of rent. I needed to find some way of paying the bills, but I quit without having another job. And that was scary. And I've done that a number of times since then, including leaving the New Yorker to play poker.
Yeah, I mean, these are all really big, scary, audacious decisions, but it seems to be working for you. And I think that's a credit to you. And I think what you've talked about there, I think Tim Ferriss calls that fear setting, where you just play out what's the worst possible outcome. And if that outcome does happen to eventuate, what's my road back? And then when you actually play out that mental sort of projection, you realize, it's not so bad. Let's do it. But if you don't do that, you kind of just think worst case scenario and you get full of anxiety and everything else, and you just take the path of least effort, which we're biologically or evolutionarily predisposed to do. But I suppose backtracking a little bit, you mentioned physics and wishing you had taken a physics class at some point in your life. And one of my favorite physicists is Richard Feynman. And
I
he's got
love
that
him
famous
too.
quote that, his books are, I love his books.
I've read his books. His books make me think. His books make me think I understand physics, but I don't. I know I don't.
Yeah. That's the talent in his writing, I suppose, that makes you think that. But absolutely a fascinating book. Surely you're joking, Mr. Feynman. Everyone should check that out. But one of the quotes that he's most famous for is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. And I know from your time on the poker tables, you learn to better read not just your opponents, but also yourself. So what sort of things have you learned there to better understand yourself and how you show up in life as well?
Oh, so much. A lot of it not very pleasant. Some things I thought, I didn't think were a problem. Poker is really, really good at highlighting what your issues are. I mean, I've called it, therapy on steroids because just all your crap's going to come out at the poker table at one point.
Sounds like I need to take a poker then, Maria.
Yes, I don't know which is cheaper. I think it depends on what stakes you're playing in poker and how expensive your therapist is. But yes, you really, you have to work through a lot because all of your issues are going to come up in how you play and then in the mistakes you made. And I realized pretty early on that I was having problems being too passive, not making enough money when I had good hands, and not asserting myself enough. And I realized that, wow, I've actually internalized a lot of the gender stereotypes that kind of society has imposed on me throughout my life. I thought of myself as a really, as a strong female, as someone who's had some amount of success, as someone who should, who's good at standing up for myself. Not so. What poker showed me was that I was actually petrified of, hurting people's feelings, that they would think that I was abrasive. So I wouldn't raise enough, I wouldn't, because I wanted them to like me. I didn't want to rub them the wrong way. That's not good at the poker table. And that's not actually a great habit to have in life when, if you always let people push you around. I'd fold when they wanted me to fold, when they bullied me, I'd let them, I'd say, you know what, just take it. I don't want to fight. I don't want to have this confrontation. I don't care enough. Just take it. And that's not a great attitude. And I realized that about myself and I thought, oh, wow, that's crazy. I can't believe that I actually have to work on this. But I did. And I think poker has actually made me much stronger outside of poker. As my husband put it very poetically, you've started taking a lot less shit from people. And I took that as a very high compliment.
Yeah.
So that was one of the most important things.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I guess something you talk about in the book is also how the nature of poker and having all these small one-off events happen over the course of a game that are unexpected helps you develop some sort of, say, emotional forbearance or fortitude, if you will, that you do then translate or transfer into life. So you build that adversity or comfort with adversity. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's really, I think, improved my emotional resilience, my ability to frame events correctly, and to kind of think, okay, how do I focus on the things I can control and let go of the things I can't? How do I move past it? How do I forget about the bad beats? And learn to make the most of any situation? How do I learn to be comfortable with uncertainty? I think these are really powerful lessons that I got from poker.
Yeah, I think that's very stoic, focusing on what you can control rather than what you can't control. So we are just about out of time. I think the last thing I just wanted to ask you was, based on what we just discussed, focusing on what you can control versus what you can't control. I mean, what have you ultimately learned throughout this entire period about the role of chance and skill in our lives?
Chance is huge. I mean, chance is so much bigger than we care to admit, or that we should admit. I mean, it's very debilitating to actually fully acknowledge just how big a role luck plays in our lives. So I think we should just focus on controlling what we can, and bluffing our way through thinking that we control more than we actually do.
Yeah, well, that's a beautiful place to end this conversation, Maria. I've really enjoyed having you on the show. The book is called The Biggest Bluff. Here's a picture of the I was going to say the album cover. You're not a rock star yet, but maybe if I speak to you in 5 years, you'll go down that road as well. Here's a picture of the book cover. People should head out and pick that up on Amazon and all places good books are sold. Where else can people find you online, Maria, if they wanted to connect?
The places where I'm most active are Twitter, where I'm Konnikova, and Instagram, where I'm Girl Named Maria, but girl doesn't have an I. It's just GRL. Okay. Not because I was trying to be cool, but because someone snagged the Girl Named Maria with an I.
Alternating caps as well, Maria?
No. All lowercase. All lowercase.
That's fantastic. I'll add that to the show notes for our listeners. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. Take care.
You too.